There was no knocking on wood in Miami, apparently, because Jalen Ramsey has a torn meniscus that he suffered in practice yesterday. The report is at least 6 to 8 weeks. I think that it's more like when you do the full-blown meniscus repair. Here's the thing about the meniscus. And even though I have no medical training whatsoever, no knowledge of how the body works, when you cover the NFL for 20-plus years, you begin to pick up some things about different injuries. And when you tear the meniscus, which is a thick flap of cartilage in your knee, you can either trim off the torn piece, which leaves you with less cartilage in your knee, which long-term isn't a good thing, or they can go in and actually repair the meniscus, which is a much longer recovery. That's the Adrian Peterson knee injury in 2016, where he was gone for almost the entire season. That's because they repaired the meniscus. Plenty of times, and I think that this happens less frequently than it used to, plenty of times they'll just say, I want to get back and play as soon as possible. Take, just like Ronnie Lott saying, take my pinky. Guys would say, take my meniscus. And then they wake up one day and they're bone on bone in their knee, and that's a problem. They took my meniscus. So Ramsey getting it repaired, but he'll be out a much longer time. And, again, we spend all the months of the offseason, Myles, talking about how this team's going to be good and this team's better and what about this team and what about that team and how's it going to go. And the one thing that we can't factor into it is who's going to go down when it's time to start practicing and playing. You take Jalen Ramsey out of the mix for the Dolphins, one of the biggest improvements they made this year, all of a sudden the Dolphins aren't as improved as they were. And it happens like that.
Yeah, it does. And this is really significant because, look, Jalen Ramsey is a top-tier defensive back. And I think when you put him in that defense with Vic Fangio, no, he has not played for Vic Fangio before, but he's played in the Vic Fangio system with the Los Angeles Rams, first under Brandon Staley, and then they kept a lot of those principles under defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. And when I would watch Jalen Ramsey, here in Los Angeles at Rams games, it's like he's one of those dudes that you just understand is very special because it's not like you don't understand what lockdown corners can be. But defensive backs a lot of the time aren't just electric, where you want to watch them on every single snap just to see what it is that they're going to do. That's the kind of player that Jalen Ramsey is, because he can go and he can cover dudes, in the secondary, in the defensive backfield, wherever you need him to be. But he can also come up there in run support and make sure that things don't get worse than they could be as a player. So, he plays that what they call the star position in the defense. So he can be inside, he can be outside, he can do all these kinds of different things. And that's a significant position that now they're not going to have either early on in the season or for most of the season. So I was thinking Miami could really make some strides, especially defensively, when you add a guy like Vic Fangio who's coordinating that defense. But if you don't have Jalen Ramsey and you don't have somebody who is that good on that defense, man, that really makes them, at least in my mind, take a bit of a step back.
And health is one of the big issues hovering over the Dolphins generally, primarily with their quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. But again, all these pieces that you accumulate, whether it's through the draft, free agency, trades, whatever, it all looks good on paper, and the process of transitioning from paper to reality happens when camp opens and guys get injured. Even though training camp practices aren't nearly as intense as they used to be, no more two-a-days, no more tackling to the ground, you still have guys out there. When you see the clips of it, they get pretty intense with the bump and run coverage and the change of direction. And all it takes is one bad step. All it takes is one application of pressure and force to a joint in a way that isn't all that fortuitous, and the next thing you know, a key player is injured, and we don't know when he's going to be back. And again, I think that 6 to 8 weeks is optimistic. It's very optimistic. It's more like 9 to 12 when you're talking about a full-blown meniscus repair. And they're probably not going to put him out there until they're 100% certain that he's fine, it's good, he's healed, and they're ready to go. Because they will be okay without him, because they were okay without him last year. This was difference maker. This was catch and pass the Bills type of a move. And now, and it happened to the Bills this week with Nyheim Hines, not as critical a piece to the Bills as Jalen Ramsey is to the Dolphins, but still. And we're just getting started. I mean, we've had the Joe Burrow near miss. We've had the Jalen Ramsey injury. We had the C.J. Gardner-Johnson, which ended up not being as bad as we thought it was going to be earlier this week. I mean, that's the thing. You've got to go through these next few weeks just with this constant background noise of this possibility. Any given moment, any given day, the tweet's going to come through, the video's going to show up that some key player is done. And, everything changes. Everything we thought about that team and how they interact with the other teams just dramatically changes. And then we have to go back and regroup. And as we're regrouping, there could be some other change that happens.
Yes, exactly. Well, see, as it pertains to the Dolphins specifically, like I think that they'll still be all right in part because they have Vic Fangio. And, you could say either the Vikings or the Dolphins may have upgraded the most at one of those coaching assistant positions, or actually the Patriots fall into that too. But when you look at it and you say, okay, we now have Vic Fangio here, who for my money is probably the best defensive coordinator in the league, the best defensive schemer, so much so that everybody's been kind of trying to say, all right, well, what does he do to make sure that offenses aren't as effective? And let's mimic and emulate that. Well, if you've got the OG of it, then that means you probably are in pretty darn good shape from a scheme standpoint. And I think that the Dolphins are going to be that much better because they have him, right? But I think if you take away an elite player like Jalen Ramsey from that, you might not be an elite defense anymore, but you should still be pretty damn good. So the Dolphins should be okay, especially because they've got an offense and an offensive schemer in Mike McDaniel who understands what he needs to do, right? So I think that the Dolphins should be fine, but they're not going to be as good as they would have been if Jalen Ramsey were a big part of that defense.
But you make a great point with Fangio, and the defense wasn't horrible last year. They're working their way toward becoming one of the more balanced teams in the NFL, which is the key. Great offense, improving defense. In Minnesota, I agree with you. You bring in Brian Flores, huge upgrade as it relates to the coach, but they don't have the players. The Dolphins have the players. Even without Jalen Ramsey, the Dolphins have the players. So Dolphins fans, don't throw in the towel yet by any means. You'll be fine without Jalen Ramsey, and he'll be back at some point for the stretch run, presumably, and will make the Dolphins even more fun. All right, let's take a break. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.